welcome to Thrive While Loving an Addict. I'm Steve Cary, and I am your host today. I'm normally the producer behind the scenes, but occasionally I step out and act as the host to interview KL Wells to talk about her journey. And this is the third episode in this series. And this is going to be a really powerful episode today because KL has got a lot to share, not only about where she's been, but where she is going. So, KL, I'd like to just start off and recognize that we're in September and it's
Mhm,
National Sobriety Month, or September is Sobriety Month. And I
mhm.
want to ask you, what does that mean to you with respect to where you are in your journey with Sam?
Well, what I'd say is I want to read a post that Sam sent that I think is incredibly powerful just in the last 4 days. So we're about the middle of September right now when we're recording this. So this is from Sam, and he said, "There is hope for the hopeless, y'all. Homeless, addicted, begging for change. God intervened and took over my life. There's no shame to my story anymore when at one point that's all I carried. I didn't have a dollar to my name at one point and slept on the floor of a homeless shelter on a mat. The fact that I make over $10,000 a month now, just a few years after that, is all God's doing. Everyone, in capitals, turned their backs on me, but I knew deep down it would all work out." And so, sobriety month for me, coming 20 years full circle, is yes, there's hope. There is possibilities that reside. And as his mom, this has been a long journey and many ups and downs, many on my knees, sobbing, many moments of he's in rehab, awesome, which turned into 12 rehabs and fentanyl and arrests and so on and so forth. I always, at the bottom, at the foundation of everything, held an aspiration for him to rise and to stay in this place. And at this point, this post is being written almost at 2 years and 4 months, clean and sober. And this is the longest he's ever been clean and sober since he was 14. So it's been an incredible journey for him. In so many respects, he's a miracle and an inspiration to so many, including myself. And it's been an incredible journey for me. You know, we've kind of simultaneously been doing these journeys. And at the same time, we've both been in recovery. So he's been in recovery in terms of transcending his addiction. I've been in recovery in terms of transcending my, the mom code, so to speak, of the messaging that we got relative to, I should be able to fix this. I should be able to control this. I should be able to change this. I should, I should. And that is just absolutely a lie and untrue. And so stepping away from that to be able to learn that I chose to shift my job to holding space for him to be able to do his journey while I witnessed his suffering. And then to do my work in terms of what I would call the thriving work. And how could I thrive in the midst of witnessing his suffering and his journey at the same time? That's a higher level calling. I really do believe for people who want to step into that space, because otherwise you're also hijacked by their disease. Their disease becomes the center and of attention, the focus of attention. And I wasn't willing to allow that to happen. At a certain point, Sam became an adult, and I wasn't going to allow his disease to take me into the hole with him. So, okay, so then how do I do that?
And that has been the central theme of your message for as long as I've been working with you.
Mhm.
And I want to take a moment to ask a question that popped in my mind because you said something really profound. So I'll start with a question. Roughly, how old is Sam right now?
He's 34.
34. You had mentioned earlier that this has been the longest period of sobriety in his lifetime since he was 14.
Mhm.
So that is 20 years
Mhm.
that we're talking about your journey of
Mhm.
witnessing Sam go through his own journey of substance use and all the pain that that brought with him. Even though some of the lowest points that you've talked about in your earlier stories that we covered in our first episode, that was fairly more recent. So what I'd like to do is go back in time a little bit and try to capture when this idea that you have about thriving despite the chaos, because I'm sure that wasn't something that happened organically early. It was something that you arrived at, maybe
Mhm.
earned. I'd like to hear about if we went way back in time, how you started to get a glimmer that there is a different path for you.
Well, I honestly, I think the notion of most people talk about surviving, and I wasn't that didn't land with me well. Like, I didn't wanna just survive in the midst of his journey of addiction because I have a life I love. I have great work that I am very passionate about. I have a great marriage. I have great friends. I live in an amazing community. I'm healthy. And my aspiration wasn't to just survive during this time. It was actually to learn how to thrive. And then as I began to kind of lean into that, I began to realize that actually my setting on a path of thriving in the midst of his disease was inspiring for him because he wasn't worrying necessarily always about how's mom doing in this or the devastation that I felt in the midst of it. Now there were moments obviously that he he knew the heartbreak moments, but that's not where I wanted to stay. And I just intuitively knew and then began to learn and understand that my journey of thriving was going to free him in a way that would be important for his journey in transcending his addiction. So that became mission critical then.
How early did you know all of this? Did you know this 20 years ago when he was
Mm-mm,
14 and 15?
mm-mm.
So, what were the things that happened at the earliest stages that gave you some of that intuition that you knew that you didn't want to be hijacked yourself? You didn't want to fall into being part of the addiction journey. You wanted to
Mhm.
have a different path. But how did that occur besides just having the sense that you had a bigger idea than just surviving?
Well, I mean, I think, because it has been 20 years, I spent quite a few of those years trying to rescue him. And I was in the hole with him. I was hijacked by the disease. I was focused on and giving my life force energy away to quote save him. And I think, as a parent dealing with a 14-year-old and a teenager, we do have a responsibility to do the best we can to help turn the corner. And then once he became an adult, it's a little bit of a different game. And so I still was very much caught up in helping the outcome be something different than that phone call that we all dread, that he lost his battle. And at some point, I realized I can't live this way, waiting for that phone call or worrying about that phone call. And I really honestly, Steve, think it's just been within the last, 5 or 6 years that it really began to dawn on me that I didn't want to die in this journey either. I still wanted to live a vibrant life. And I've done enough work along the way and I've seen enough of the journey of addiction and the journey of enabling and the journey of trying to rescue that to see how generally that's kind of a failed strategy. And so we were talking earlier before we got on, and I said, I've always every summer I have backpacked. That has been mission critical. It has been non-negotiable. I go to the mountains. I get solo. I get pulled out of and disconnected from this craziness that we call life so that I can stay relatively sane in the midst of this world. And so this past summer, I spent 11 days disconnected in the Beartooth Mountains in Montana, which interestingly enough, it was a full circle moment for me because 20 years ago when I first sent him to rehab as a 14-year-old and then to a school. I spent every weekend that summer in the Beartooth Mountains in Montana, healing from the trauma of trying to rescue him. And so I went back now to celebrate, his recovery, my recovery. Both of us are living vibrant and great lives, and he's rebuilding his, and and I have a great life. And so I wanted to continue that. And so there's a thread there of the importance of self-care that's always been present for me. And I think it's exemplified by my consistency and my dedication to getting out to nature and backpacking and disconnecting and re restoring my energy and recharging every year. And so that's one of the things that has helped me thrive.
Now, you just a moment ago talked about this idea of you went back and this time you're celebrating. And what's remarkable about how you verbalize this is there's two elements, obviously, but it's deeper than that. You talk about Sam's journey and you're celebrating on his behalf,
Mhm,
his recovery journey, and you're talking about yourself equally in your journey as your recovery, going through that trauma of seeing him go through that. And
mhm,
the part that I wanted to really hone in on is that it's very clear when I speak with you that your journey is independent of his, although they are tightly coupled, but you are bringing this message of agency wherever
mhm,
you go, that at any given moment, where regardless of where you are in a similar journey, you
mhm,
have agency and you have choice.
mhm,
And that is the part I think it is so profound and remarkable about this is because you can start that at the earliest phase
mhm,
and when it feels like it's the darkest and deepest and worst times.
mhm. Well, you've heard me say before that I have a very firm belief that when life feels like it's falling apart, it's actually falling together. And I have a very deep belief that no matter what is has happened, that there are always gifts and lessons embedded in those experiences. And so to be able to always keep that in mind, which has led to the notion that this is all in service of a higher purpose. His journey is in service of a higher purpose. My journey is in service of a higher purpose. All this pain and heartbreak and disruption and chaos and pain, I want it to be in service of a higher purpose. And so always leaning into what is the higher purpose? What are the lessons and gifts embedded in each one of these experiences that I've had along the way? And they have stacked in terms of my knowing about this and have ultimately led to, this notion of what I would call, a massive transformative purpose or an impossible goal of a million thriving. And so if I can, in the midst of 20 years of going through this, all of this, come out the other side with the notion that this has always been in service of a higher purpose, and then knowing what that is, particularly in the times that we are in massive disruption and massive chaos right now. Well, so I think of my journey with Sam as this has all been skilling up for me to be able to deliver in this moment in time that we're all in. You can thrive in the midst of the chaos and the disruption and the destruction that's taking place. And therefore, in my world, it will begin to lift more boats that direction.
So you're the way I hear it, and I know about this already, but it sounds even better now that I've heard it communicated just the way you said it. It's easy to put your situation on a pedestal and look at it from outside and say, wow, she did all this work. She knew ahead of time that she didn't want to have this type of outcome and did all these things. Somebody else did all this stuff and now they're in a good spot. That's how it could sound. But instead, you're taking the point of view that I've lived this and I know a lot as a result of it. And I realize that this is in fact possible for everybody else going through this. And
Mhm,
it doesn't take you to be like me
mhm,
exactly,
Mhm.
or even have the personality that you have. It just means
Mhm.
that you need to know from the very beginning that
Mhm.
you have an option and
Mhm.
that it is possible, in fact, to thrive.
Yes. It's one of the things that I find in the work that I do is that a lot of people don't necessarily believe they have agency over their own life. And, circumstances are going to happen to us just because we're humans. The circumstances do not need to define who we are in the sense of this happened to me and therefore I am this way. This happened to me and I can define who I am because of it in all different kinds of ways. And so, whereas, some people have the experiences that I've had and they never recover from the heartbreak. Their heart is shattered and that's how they live their life from a shattered place. And we have choice. And if that's what I'm saying is we all have choice. And so, and believe me, just because it looks good right now, it has been dark, it has been ugly, it has been devastating at times. It's just, I'm not going to allow the dark, the ugly, the devastation to define who I am and kind of capture me in that darkness and devastation. I'm going to use that to look for, okay, what are the gifts and lessons in these moments? And it has caused me to explore and figure out how to rise from the darkness and the devastation and the heartbreak. And and then to learn that actually, after you do this so many times, I mean, I've been on my knees more times than, you know, a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I've always risen. And so there's not a story that a parent can tell me. There's not a story that a friend can tell me, a sib can tell me, a spouse can tell me that I haven't heard before. And most of it, except for Sam lived. I have not had the experience of him overdosing and dying. I have friends and we have interviewed people for this podcast that have had that experience. And even in the midst of that experience, they have found purpose and they have created purpose in their lives that is serving at a higher level. Those are the kinds of people that I look to continue to inspire me to do the work that I do.
The themes that I hear every time we talk about this are the ones we just covered: choice and agency,
Mhm.
the knowing that there is an option, that it is possible. And
Mhm.
then you get to the how. And I think the other thing I wanted to dive into on this, when we get to the how, of that these are all skills. You've always talked about the how of navigating this. These are just skills to be learned,
Is it?
not a superpower that one does or doesn't have inside you. It turns into a superpower if you practice these skills and get
Mhm.
better at them. But
Mhm.
they all start by learning new skills at a very simple level very
Mhm.
quickly early on.
Mm. Mhm.
You
Well,
know,
I mean,
so
first off, it's just opening being open to the idea that instead of surviving, you can thrive. And if you're open to that idea and you begin to adopt the notion that you could thrive, then you can begin to practice some of the things that actually allow you to thrive. And I talked about it in the TED Talk that I did that was released last year. I write about it in the book, The Five Acts of Courage, which I had to like sit down and think through. Okay, what were the things that I did? And first and foremost was I entertained the notion that, oh man, I could actually thrive in the midst of this chaos. Well, then I needed to find people who were thriving, as teachers. And so I began to listen to other people and read other books and find stories that inspired me and taught me what were some of the things I could do that would be catalytic in terms of my own thriving. And then I just started trying stuff. And I think that's where the journey really begins, just an openness to the idea that you could thrive and you can thrive. And then there are plenty of people that can model this and do model this on a regular basis. And I've been blessed to interview a number of people that are exemplars and expressions of rising above and including the chaos and the disruption and the trauma, but including it to serve from a thriving place.
I do want to note that we'll include in the show notes the link to the resources you mentioned, the link to the TEDx talk, which is
Mhm.
titled How My Family Learned to Navigate Addiction. And you go through your entire story in that talk. And also the book that we mentioned as well. Put those in the show notes. I think the thing that is so appealing about hearing you describe this is you look for the examples that are already occurring of people thriving or people doing something with purpose.
Mhm.
And if you entertain the notion of, I don't need to survive this, but I can thrive while navigating this,
Mhm.
that is the difference between believing it's actually possible versus accepting that it isn't even an option.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think about like people like Jim Horton, who's out of Fresno, California. I've interviewed him several times for the podcast. I've gone down and spoken at one of his events. And, they lost their son to an overdose. And within a relatively short period of time, even in the massive, massive grief that he and his wife were experiencing, they created the Zachary Horton Foundation. He's an inspiration to me. And I know, I mean, if you go back and listen to some of the interviews with him, he's very open and his emotions are very available when he talks about certain moments in going through this experience of having lost his son. It was absolutely breathtakingly devastating. And yet, out of that, they still have created a foundation that serves their community, and they have continued to elevate that service to their community. I think of Rachel Graham out of Texas, who created, I forget the name of the recovery community. But if you go back and listen to my interviews with her, again, the spouse of someone that she thought she knew, she thought she had the life of dreams. And within a heartbeat, she found out it was all a lie. And out of that grief and trauma, she did her work and she put it to use in changing other people's lives. And so, again, called to a higher purpose. There are so many people like this, people who have written books that we've interviewed numbers of people that have written books that have been through incredibly traumatic experiences as kids and as teenagers. And so that's part of why we do this podcast. Part of why I do this podcast is because I have the opportunity to talk to people who have been through incredibly crushing life experiences, whether they've been in the addiction space or whether they've been in the loved one space, and how they have transformed their experience into a life of purpose.
I want to come back to this impossible goal that's not impossible. The idea of 1 million people thriving despite the chaos.
Mhm.
What does that look like to you when you close your eyes and imagine 1 million people thriving?
It looks to me like I'm having more conversations with people who are skilling up and actually learning to be an expression of a vibrant life instead of the vast majority of conversations that I have outside of the people that I interview for the podcast with people who are caught in the devastation of the disease. And it reminds me of my brother was addicted to cocaine. And so this was back in the 80s. Well, at that time, nobody was talking about addiction. And I helped my brother get into a rehab facility in a hospital at the time. And I was very open with my friends, with work, so on and so forth. There was not one person who had a story for me. Whereas you jump forward, 40, there's very few people that you can talk to now that don't have some sort of story. And they're willing to actually say it. They may not want to go into a lot of detail around it, but they're willing to say, oh, I have a brother, I had a mom, I had a dad, I have a friend, you know, and and so that's what it reminds me of is when I think about 1 million thriving is I don't hear these stories enough right now. That if we lean into and create vehicles to skill people up in terms of thriving. When there's a million people thriving, we're going to hear the stories more and more and more and more. And that is going to be a tipping point for an understanding within the loved ones community of addiction that this, in fact, is an option in a very powerful way.
I love that because it is so, the way you describe it is so dead simple and it's obvious, but at the same time, it's not. Because when something isn't normalized, it feels like it's far away. So, this
Mhm,
idea of thriving instead of
mhm,
surviving, that feels like it's far away if you never are exposed to the stories.
mhm,
When that becomes normalized, that's an indication that we're achieving this goal of a million people thriving. When
mhm.
you have a conversation with somebody who's going through some of these heartbreaking stories and they say, yeah, this is all happening. And here's what I'm doing to navigate this.
Eh,
I come out in a
mhm,
better place. I've
mhm.
achieved something out of this. When that type of event is a normal part of the discussion, that means we're on the way to realizing a million people thriving.
Yes, and at the same time that loved ones will be elevated and more common, that frees up those that we love that are dealing with addiction to stop the worry about us and focus on their own journey and thriving. And so there's a bigger play here. There's us first as loved ones, and then it actually serves the addict and the person's suffering from substance use disorder.
And now that is a beautiful statement, and it's also counterintuitive to what
Mhm,
is commonly thought to be the process because somebody is going through addiction or treatment or rehab. And as you described it earlier, you go into parent mode and I need
mhm,
to fix this. I need to do this. I need to do that. This
mhm,
overwhelming sense of responsibility that I have the power to fix. And you made it very clear that you do not have that power to fix. Only the person going through addiction has that power, but you do have the power to fix yourself.
mhm,
And you just said that take care of yourself first, and that frees up your loved one to go through the journey that they must and need to go through. And only
mhm.
they can go through that. If I'm capturing that correctly, understand
Yeah.
correctly.
Yes. I mean, and so, another person that I interviewed that I think has a program that's incredibly powerful, Beverly Buncher out of Florida. There's a book that she wrote. There's a program that she has called BALM Recovery, Be a Loving Mirror. And so we'll put that in the show notes also. But she, kind of came to her own realization dealing with a spouse and then put this program together to help people do what we're talking about is thrive. And that's an incredible program. Kathy Wren out of Richmond, Virginia, they have a program. I believe it's called Illuminate. And they've just done a family documentary on how they learned to step into the space as parents, she and her husband, with their son's addiction. And it completely changed the dynamic for them and therefore for their son. And they have a really great story of hope also. And so illuminating more and more of these stories frees up the person who's dealing with substance use disorder to do their work if they can get to that point. And again, it's all a choice. And let me be super clear. It is just darn hard to watch somebody that you love and care about that you would give your life for suffer at that level. And so what I can say is you can learn to do it differently.
Well said. I think that is a good way to start to wrap up the conversation.
Mhm.
And just to recap everything that we've gone through, you talked about your journey at length. And if you want to hear more about your journey, we've done 2 episodes prior to this
Mhm.
about how you in fact navigated the lowest points. But really the point I wanted to end up on is going forward, how do we march towards this impossible goal of a million people thriving?
Mhm.
And one thing I'll mention is that we've got our resources already that we'll provide to you in the show notes, but you just mentioned off half a dozen profound,
Mhm.
amazing, and high impact stories that other people are doing.
Hmm.
And if we find ways to normalize those conversations,
Hmm.
it then reinforces the idea that you're bringing to the table, which is it is in fact possible to thrive
Hmm.
despite the darkest moments that you're going to go through in this journey.
Hmm.
And these are things that can be accomplished. It's you're doing nothing to minimize how difficult it is, but
Hmm.
it's effort that's so worthwhile, and it's possible, and it's something that you can start regardless of how deep and dark that moment that you're in. That's
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I would say is one of the most powerful ways to lean into this is read people's stories of thriving, listen to people's stories of thriving. That's why we do the podcast. Somebody recently asked me, well, do you still need to do this podcast? Sam's doing great. And I was like, yes, of course I need to do this podcast. One is, it's part of my recovery. It's part of me keeping on that path of talking to extraordinary people that have learned to thrive in the midst of their journey and are leaning into a higher purpose. And so those are the people I want to hang out with. And the more stories that people listen to, then they can begin to kind of get the notion that they can thrive. And so, like just today, if somebody hears this podcast, they're going to hear, look, it's actually possible. Are you open to entertaining the notion that you could thrive instead of survive? And if that message is heard and it's heard enough and somebody is like, okay, I'm willing to entertain the notion. That's a win.
yeah. And that is the first step
Hmm.
towards this big idea of a million people thriving. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we close out this episode, this interview?
I want to make sure that I speak to people who are in the throes of heartbreak right now, great pain, whether your son or daughter or spouse or friend has been arrested, has overdosed and lived, has consistently, browbeat you for money, who may be living in your home and really just wreaking havoc on, there is hope that it can be different. You can have a more sane life. And if you can entertain the notion that that's possible, then continue to listen to these kinds of podcasts, go to the TED Talk, read the book, reach out to me if necessary. I'm happy to refer people because I do that all the time to people that I believe can help them open that door of possibility to a different way of doing this. Know that there is hope, there's possibility, and there is a different way to be in this experience.
I think that's perfect. I think that's a wonderful place to end on. And I think that about wraps it up.
Well, I want to say thank you for doing this, Steve. I know this isn't the most comfortable thing for you, but you do a great job. And I'm super grateful for you having been on this journey with me for a number of years now. And yeah, thank you.
Well, you are welcome. And on a personal note, I'll add that I think this giant idea of yours, and when you talk about there's nothing more important to do right now than continue doing this podcast,
Mhm.
there's purpose behind that. I'm very grateful to be part of it and the impact that I know that it can make with just one person. It makes it's such a tremendous gift back to me being part of the journey. So I'm hoping in every way that this crazy goal is not only realized, but we hit it so far beyond. And along
Mhm.
the way, we'll help one person, then another. And that is
Mhm.
meaningful.
Fantastic.